Hi, everybody. I'm Shawley Bubinek, President and founder of Premier HR Solutions and the sponsor of the Ethics in Business Alliance program. I am so excited to be presenting today's webinar, Beyond the Resume, Hiring for Character. We've had an overwhelming response to the webinar, and I think you're going to find it to be very informative. I've got Delia Perez, one of our Premier HR advisors here as my co-pilot. And I also have Bob Lewis. Bob is, let's go to the next slide. Bob is a consultant for Lewis Training and Consulting. And he is a national and international speaker and trainer that's delivered keynote speeches, retreats, breakout sessions, virtual and remote sessions. He's presented to many organizations, federal government, state government, national and local corporations, and educational entities throughout the United States, United Kingdom, Mexico, China, and Spain. And he has over 25 years experience in training and facilitation. And one of his areas of expertise is behavioral interviewing. He is the person that introduced it to me, and I'm excited for him to share his processes. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Shawley. Glad to be here.
So let's begin by talking about who is sponsoring the ethics, the webinar today, and that is the Ethics in Business Alliance. And some of you this may be new to you, and you may be wondering, what is the Ethics in Business Alliance? Well, it's a network of businesses who believe that doing good is good business. It's free to join. If you join the organization, you get monthly content released to your inbox, some great resources on developing ethics and company culture in your organization, and you get access to training and networking events like today's event to inspire ethical business practice. The Ethics in Business Alliance is one of the recognized good programs. And we have Joel Kaufman, who's the executive director from Recognized Good, on our panel today. Hi, Joel. Hey, Joel, would you tell everybody a little bit about Recognized Good and about the Ethics and Business Award as well?
Sure. Well, it's been a pretty natural path to get here where we are today. So Recognized Good is all about sharing great examples of goodness. And on the business side, that for 10 years now has been our Ethics in Business Award, where we look for businesses that exemplify respect and fairness and integrity in their day-to-day business, and then they can prove it. So a couple of our panelists today are past winners and can tell you that it's not an easy process to get through. Frankly, it's a pretty thorough, but we do make businesses prove it. And the way that award has led to the Ethics in Business Alliance is we ask the question, we're really good at cheerleading the businesses that essentially already are doing it really, really well. How do we create a bridge for those that want to become award worthy, or even for past awardees that want to continue practicing continual improvement? So that's why we've built something that will just kind of keep the conversation going constantly. And so that's what led us to this webinar today. So it's been a pretty natural path.
All right, great. And we do have an event coming up later this spring. Delia, on the next slide, the Ethics in Business Award. You want to tell us a little bit about what's coming up in the spring in regards to how we can't have this award presentation in person like we normally do at the AT&T Center. So what can we expect this year?
Sure. So right now we've got a team of student examiners from our partners at Concordia University who are hard at work doing that thorough vetting of all of this year's candidates. They'll be whittling the nominees in each of these 5 categories you see on your screen here down to 3 finalists next week, which is always it's fun for me to jump into. That's where the biggest debates happen. Everyone's fighting for their candidate. And it really leads to some good questions about what we prioritize when it comes to how we treat our own staff and our businesses, as well as our business partners and our community. So that's what's happening next week. And then our awards will be announced on June the 3rd, virtually this year again. We're getting better at the virtual awards presentation year after year, 2 years in a row now. But yeah, we're excited to announce the award winners on June the 3rd virtually. And for everybody here on this webinar today, I think it would be worth an hour of your time to join us when the time comes.
And we'll be sending out that information. If you're on you'll be on our public, on our distribution list. And we're really, to be nominated even for the award is a huge honor. And then to become a finalist or an award winner is even really above the top. And we're really fortunate today. We've got Andrew Cooper here with Tyrex Group. He's going to be talking to us a little bit on our panelists later in the presentation. And Tyrex is an award winner of the Ethics in Business Award. And then we've got Ed Traves with Corvalent Manufacturing in the Cedar Park, Austin area. And they've been a finalist 2 years in a row. So we're excited to hear from these business leaders as well on their take about today's topic of discussion. All right, so let's move on to the discussion points of what we're going to be talking about today. The first thing we're going to be talking about is why hiring for character matters. And we'll explore some things there, and then we'll learn how to identify character traits that align with your organization's values. Bob is going to talk to us about strategies for assessing character, and he's going to help us understand how to create behavioral-based questions. This will be interactive, so we will be asking you to jot down your ideas, and there'll be a place during the presentation where we will ask you to share your comments, because part of the great experience here is to be interactive and to learn from others. Bob and I and Andrew and Ed, we've got some great things great examples to share with you, but I know that you guys out there have other things that you can share that'll be very valuable. So I will encourage you, and when that time comes, we'll unmute you. Delia will be our pilot there, and we will unmute you. I know some of you ask a question whether you're automatically muted right now, and you are. If you have a question, please, or you would like to put something in the chat section, please do that. I think I've got Joel and Delia monitoring that for us right now. All right, so let's move on to a question that I want us to ponder over for a couple of minutes right now, and we're going to come back to this question. So I know that many of you out there do hiring for your organization. You're either an HR in the HR industry, or you're maybe a hiring manager or a CEO or an executive in an organization. And we all have our favorite question to ask in an interview. And so I want you to take a moment, if you have a pen, jot down your idea of what is one of your favorite questions that you like to ask in an interview that helps you gather information beyond the resume, beyond a person's skills and experience, but really gives you some insight on a person's character, on their values, and how that may align with your organization. And we're going to come back to this question later on in the presentation, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to take a moment and be thinking about that. Okay. All right, so let's look at some interesting facts. I did some research on why this is important and found a study that was conducted over 3 years with 20,000 participants. And some interesting facts that I came across from this study is that 46% of hired employees fail within the first 18 months. Almost half. That only 19% of new hires will become successful in their new role. And this is a poor track record when we look at a study of that magnitude. And I think that this is one of the greatest challenges that face many businesses and organization is making sure that you have effective hiring practices, because it can be very ineffective and have a drastic impact on your budget, on your employee morale. We know that the average cost of a bad hire is 2 to 3 times their annual salary. And you may be thinking, really? Well, if you consider advertising, the time of your recruiting, your HR department, the time of your hiring manager, the other people that are involved in onboarding new people. And you also look at potential terminations and severance packages that may go into effect when you have a termination and you have to offer that. Indirect costs like employee morale, loss of productivity that a vacancy in your organization can have, how it impacts your customer service, your delivery of goods, employee satisfaction, your company culture, and all of that comes into factor. And so the big challenge here is very clear. How do we hire better? How do we hire right the first time? And that's what we're going to explore in today's webinar. So, why does hiring for character matter? The same study identified the 5 major reasons why that 46% of new hires fail in the first 18 months. And the number one reason was coachability at 26%. This is the ability for the new hire to accept and implement feedback from others. Emotional intelligence came in second at 23%. And this is the ability to understand and manage one's own emotions and accurately assess others' emotions. Motivation was third at 17%, and that's a person's sufficient drive to achieve one's full potential. Temperament was at 15%, and this is what we refer to as attitude. And the personality and whether it's suited to fit in with your organization and your company culture. And technical competence was only 11%. But I will say that when working with several hiring managers, I find that the number one determining factor of who they select for a job depends on the resume and the technical competence that they have. But as we see from here, that's not the number one reason why new hires fail. So I wanted to bring up to Andrew first and then to Ed, why hiring for character matters in their organization. Andrew.
Sure, Shelly. Thanks for bringing me on. You know, I think character is incredibly important at particularly at different stages of your business. I mean, we've all started business that have or engaged in business that is big. Different size businesses have different needs and requirements, and so for somebody who is like Ed, who has started a business from scratch, these things play out different roles at different times within the company. But it's really about the soul of your company when you think about the character, and it's about the culture that you want your company to display, and it's about the moral compass of your company. And it's not just internal to your company, but it's external and kind of all encompassing. So for making the right decisions, that you get the right people that have the right character is incredibly important. So again, for me, it's and for us as a corporation, as your company grows, right? I mean, you can't be everywhere all the time. So you're really relying on the key asset of the company, which is your people, to be able to do the right thing, to make the right decisions, and not only internally, but amongst one another and within the community.
Great. Okay, Ed, why does character matter for Corvalent?
It does matter a lot. As a matter of fact, we have an interesting process at our company that most managers typically do interviews for skills and abilities. Much like you said, you know, it's 11%. but it's actually very important. You know, we need to know if the individual has the skills and abilities. But there's a part of the interview where I usually step in, and I like to know every employee inside of our organization. That's what I call the cultural interview. And that's basically based on character, traits, and attributes. I truly believe, based on my own personal experience when I had a coach, when I began my career, is he looked at my traits and attributes because those are the things that drive passion. So as you start to asking questions about traits and attributes with any interviewer, you get to know their character, but you also know what drives their passion. And from that, you're able to actually really know if that matches not only your culture, but also the fundamentals of our company. So it is extremely important to us asking the right questions to absorb those kind of things. And I have to have somebody that it is focused on asking specific questions on that to make sure that you get that portion of the interview. That's pretty much like 50% of our hiring process. If they don't pass that, typically they either don't match your culture or they don't match the traits and attributes for the job. We don't feel that they're passionate for the job. And that's basically something that we take very seriously.
Okay, great. Well, two great takeaways. Identifying the moral compass and asking questions to find out what their passion is and how that aligns. So thank y'all very much. So Delia is going to bring up a poll on our next slide, and we would like for all of our participants there are 5 reasons why a new hire has failed in the survey that we saw: coachability, emotional intelligence, motivation, temperament, or technical competence. Think back to a recent hire, or someone that did not stay with your company. Why did they fail? What was the reason? What was the number one reason why they failed? I'm going to give you a few moments to answer. And then Delia, let us know when we're ready to share the responses.
Okay, I will. We've got some people still selecting their responses. All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling, and then I'll share the results.
Okay. So emotional intelligence seems to be the big one. But coachability is up there, motivation, temperament. We did see a higher percentage here with technical. And then we have some people that they're not sure. And that brings to the next point. If you don't know, if you're in HR and you don't know why that person wasn't a good hire, go back to the hiring manager, department manager, and ask questions to find out which of these areas did we miss it on, right? And that will help us improve our hiring process. Okay. All right. Thank you. So how can I make the right hire, right? This is a challenge that even the best recruiters have. We don't get it right every single time. However, I think that there is one scenario that most of us have experienced before, and it's this. You spend weeks culling through multiple resumes that you received on Indeed, many of which aren't even close to having the skills and competence that you need. You finally collect a select number and you begin your interviewing process. And you go through the interviews, and your hiring managers interview them, and you make a hire, and that person shows up to work. And 1 or 2 days, or maybe a week later, you're asking yourself, where is the person that I hired? This is not the person that I hired. What has happened? And clearly you realize right then and there that you've made a mistake, right? And if that scenario sounds familiar, you are not alone, because it happens to us even the best of us. And so in my in my drive to find out how can I improve my hiring selection and my pursuit to find the best hire, I was introduced to behavioral interviewing, and that was with Bob Lewis. Bob trained me on behavioral interviewing back in the early 2000s at University of Texas, and we did some major projects together with a large corporate organization throughout the United States. And from then on, I was hooked. And so a portion of this presentation is going to present these strategies for behavioral interviewing, which may be new to you. It may be a refresher for you. So what is behavioral interviewing? So it's basically an interview process where we're asking selected questions to identify past behaviors that occurred in the workplace that will predict future behaviors. So the basis is past behaviors, asking questions to find out about how a person responded to a certain situation in the past will indicate whether they will be successful in the new position. Some of you may be exposed to the STAR interview, which is an acronym for structuring your interview questions so that you present a situation, a task, an action, and a result. We're not going to be talking about the STAR interviewing process here. What we are going to be talking about here is how to develop behavioral interview questions like Ed talked about that help determine whether that person has a trait based on their predictive responses. And we're going to share how we do that with you. Behavioral interview really looks beyond the resume. I think when I look at hiring managers, many of hiring managers I work with, it's an educational process where I have to educate them on the importance of what to look for beyond the resume. And why do hiring managers depend so much on the resume? Well, I think one of it is they're very comfortable. They know how to read a resume. They know how to evaluate job experience and read for experiences and identify skills on the resume. But they may not know how to do behavioral interview. And they may know that they need to ask questions to find out about traits, but they may not know how to design those questions and how to evaluate a response, because a behavioral interview question is not any good if you don't know how to evaluate the response that you get. So we're going to look at how often does our audience, our participants here, how many of you use behavioral interviewing right now? Delia's going to bring up another poll. Have you never used behavioral interviewing before? Have you sometimes used it, or do you always use it? Is it part of every part of you? Is it part of your recruiting process? Like Ed said, that is a part of his company's recruiting process. So let's take a moment to cast your vote. How often do you use behavioral interviewing right now?
I'm going to go ahead and end the polling.
Okay, pull up our results. All right. So we have great. We've got some people that always use it, and that's exciting. Hopefully we're going to be providing you some additional insight today. We have some people that sometimes use it, and then we have some people that have never used it. So good information. I think we're going to provide you with something that each category can take away. So as I said, we've got Bob Lewis, who has years of experience training managers and HR professionals on how to conduct behavioral interviews, how to identify traits and create those questions. And I'm going to let Bob take it over from here.
Thanks, Shelley. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me, and thanks for spending part of your day. I know time is valuable. So often when we hire people, we hire for skill, but we fire for behavior. I came upon that in realizing early in my career as a young manager at 28, I won't tell you my age now, but I hired for skill and actually was in education, and I hired some teachers and they were very skillful. But what I realized was the character trait that was really important in education was empathy. So I started shifting and getting training on this topic as much as I just became so deep into it, because I know that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. And I realized that hiring for character, hiring for behavior is important. And so is skill. I'm not discounting that we don't hire for skill, because that's an important piece. But what I realized is that all along that we need to hire also based on the company's values. In behavioral interviewing, I was working with a client the other day and I said, what are your company values? And they stood in shock and they said, well, we're not sure. So they went searching in their building and they were printed in front of their bank. And they said, oh, those are our values. And I asked, do we hire for those? There's often a disconnect sometimes when we at onboarding, we say, these are the character traits. But I've had managers saying, one thing that we hire for is integrity and innovation. But not once during our interview did we ask questions on that. So as you look through it, asking the right questions is important. And Dale, if you'd go to the next slide, that would be cool, is that we often ask questions. And this is what happens. I don't know if you've experienced this out there, is that you say, we're going to hire somebody. Everybody go write questions. Everybody writes their questions. They interview that person and then they ask, who did you like? And then that person gets hired. And then 6 months later, you're shocked because it's this person that has maybe some not so wonderful behaviors creating chaos in your organization. There's this next slide talks about tip-off behavioral questions. You may have heard it before, tip-off, probing, or leading. All too often we ask questions, and I'm gonna give you an example. I was working with a client and they said, we have this great question. I said, tell me. And they said, tell me a time when you solved conflict. What were the 3 steps that you took to solve that conflict and what were the outcomes? And the CEO goes, dang, I think I just gave him the answer. So all too often it's really important, and maybe I'm just extremely passionate about it, is writing great questions. Now, we're not saying that these questions are horrible questions up here. By all means, they will elicit a response. But it says, tell me about a time when you had to adapt to a difficult situation. What did you do? Well, within the context of this question, we almost gave the answer, because a smart candidate will say, adapt. Well, I'm not very adaptable, but I will tell them how I might adapt even if I don't have that skill set. Sometimes with candidates, we want to ask a question because we want to hear what we want to hear. I don't know if any of you have been guilty of that. I raise my name. Hey, I'm Bob. I'm guilty of that by all means of doing that. Tipping off sometimes gives the candidate the opportunity to make up their story, or they give you a canned response and you write it down. You say, well, that's a pretty good response. If you look at the second question, which is kind of interesting, it says, tell me about a time when you had to balance competing principles and so did successfully. Another way to say that, probably without leading that, tell me about a time when you had to look at competing priorities. What did you do? Because the words balance and successfully, they're going to use that with their answer. And all too often when I'm leading or probing to get them to hear what I want to hear can be very dangerous. For one, we're not really getting the raw answer for that. When Charlie asked me what's one of the favorite questions too, and I'll go to the next one, it says, are you a good listener? How can you tell? Great listeners will give you the raw truth. People who are not great listeners, which maybe I still need work in that area, will start saying, well, they'll just start getting you a litany of stuff, but it's not very predictive. Also in tip-off or behavioral-based questions, it says, tell me about a conflict with a coworker. How did you resolve it? You could shorten that by just saying, have you ever had a conflict with a coworker? Please describe. So the point here, and some of you may go on, what? I'm not sure if I totally agree with this, but sometimes we may give them too much information in the question, which leads them. tips them off, which I like that word, which Shali has shared with me, is it gives them information to answer it the way they think that what you want to hear. So as we move through the questions, what I've come up, and Shali and I've worked for years and years, I came up with this process in the next slide that really kind of shares so what I charge you with, instead of going back and saying, please write a question, I think the first thing in behavioral interviewing, because when you think about what's the difference between a behavior and a skill, a behavior is kind of like intuitive, you're born with it. A skill is something that you can teach. So let's think about the behavior of responsibility. I don't know if any of you have kids. I have 3. 2 of them are extremely responsible. And the other one, I think he got an F in art because he didn't turn things in. He wasn't real responsible. I could teach all day long. But what this process allows you is to discover, are they responsible? So as you look at this chart, which is kind of interesting, is before I even write the question, I figure out what behaviors do I need for a position. So you might think about it, maybe you could even put this in the chat room, is what kind of behaviors are you looking for in your next position? So, one thing that I look for is responsibility and communication, because 84% of employees say people don't know how to communicate. So communication is a really strong piece, and that's called a trait. The behavior is any action of a trait. So for example, responsibility, the behavior of a responsible person is they speak up, they own their mistakes. So in this process, and I wish I had more time to go through it, but I wanted to kind of give you an overview, is that I analyze the behaviors. Also, I will ask my top talent, what are the behaviors that are needed in this position? And they will give you the answers. Also, it's interesting to watch your maybe not so top performer, we'll call it that. And they will give you some of the behaviors that you might want to pay attention to, that they don't have responsibility. So you're going to hear both stories. So what I usually do is we identify the behaviors, and then we define traits, identify the behaviors. And then I write the questions. What's interesting too is as you write these questions, before we used to just write these questions, I'm going to give you a little trick here when you're writing questions. Even if you were just to write a good behavioral-based question, take those questions and interview your top talent, because your top talent has the answers to those questions. Also, your bottom talent has some answers to those questions that maybe not be predictive of that behavior. And I don't know if in the chat room, if people have listed kind of any behaviors that you have. I do think, thank you, Justine, saying teaching changes, skills, training changes, behavior can be changed. Yeah, if the person wants to be, I'm a little bit older. Sometimes I don't want to change my behavior, but you have to be willing to change also. So as you look at this whole process of analyzing behaviors, it's kind of like re-engineering. It's saying, let's look at what behaviors are next for that job. Also, when we as a team decide what the behaviors, post it on the job description, post it on the job posting, because your questions match or mirror the behaviors that you posted for. So that, as you look at it, that's really important, the whole process. And please, we can stay on later if you have questions about it. So what character traits are important to you? And I think this is kind of where I ask. Let's take a moment to type that function or type that behavior within the chat. And I don't know if we want to open it up for anybody to say out loud, Shali, or if you, or you just want.
I would like to hear from Andrew and Ed on the character traits that, a character trait or multiple traits that they look for.
Cool.
So Ed, let's begin with you. I know you said, you're trying to evaluate passion for the job. So what are some traits you look for?
Well, as I said, traits and attributes drive passion. Passion drives energy. For me, one of the biggest fundamentals in our company is passion and energy. We're in the manufacturing business. There's several things that we ask about being trying to understand if some of the traits and attributes are creative people, energetic people, detail-oriented people. Those are like major things that we're looking for besides skills and abilities, right? For us, it's very, very important. Just so funny is that, I look at very little things. How the individual that is coming to interview with us walk from the parking lot to the front door. The level of energy, it tells you a lot about that too. Just like the way the individual talks, the way the individual walks, it tells you a lot about energy. We're in a very fast-paced industry, high-tech industry. So some of the traits are very important to us. The other thing is creativity. Creativity, drives innovation. I think every job needs innovation. Every job needs creativity. And especially this day and age, processes change based on creativity and innovation, right? So those are the big things that we ask questions about. And my interviews are typically cultural, skills and abilities. My managers do a great job. But the culture interview usually takes me about an hour and a half. I wish every resume that I got actually lists their traits and attributes to begin with, because it takes me at least a half hour to at least identify those, and then takes me another half hour to an hour to get examples of them. And I think that's it's a major thing that I think we need to teach kids about traits and attributes in high school. So when they go to the job market, they actually list their traits and attributes, things that their father, mother, teacher, sister, brother, friends tell them about the whole entire life, but not in a 2-hour session where they actually get their traits and attributes on a piece of paper, and they really know what drives their passion, so they can actually choose the right college to go to, the right course to take, the right industry to get into, the right profession to follow. And those are the things that I think it's very important for me as a CEO, as a trying to hire anybody in this company. I want to know about traits and attributes that drive passion.
Okay, Andrew, how about you?
Thanks.
Great, Ed. Those are fantastic comments. It's funny you talked about watching them walk from their car through the parking lot. It tells you a lot about somebody's intentionality and their passion and their drive. And a lot of the comments you made really resonated. Obviously, we're in similar manufacturing backgrounds, and so a lot of the things that you communicated really resonated with us as well. Obviously, communication skills are critical. We're trying to understand how genuine this individual is. Reliability is a big piece. Are they going to show up late? Are they going to show up early? Are they going to stay late and do whatever it takes to be successful? Are they team oriented? I mean, we are a big family, and although our factory is currently broken into 7 zones, it's probably one of the hardest things for us right now, is because we are so team oriented and reliant on one another. We're looking for, are they on the offense or are they on the defense? And I think in today's environment, we all need to be playing offense. We all need to be leaning into it and adapting relatively quickly. And the other one is, are you comfortable with change? And the one thing that has been consistent for us over the past 27 years or whatever it's been is change is constant. And if you don't change and if you're not flexible, the inevitable will happen. And we've seen that over and over again. So for us, things are, as you said, it's such a competitive market and things are moving so quickly that it's incredibly important that our folks are comfortable with change. So
Thanks, Andrew. Obviously, good stuff. So as you look at, why are character traits important? So looking at the next slide, once you've selected that character trait, what's interesting is that ahead of time, a lot of times people don't select those character traits and they never measure it, and then they're really surprised. So the process as we look at it is that first you select a character trait. What are some of the character traits that you have that are needed? What is the character trait in that job? And what percentage of the time do they need to have it? Well, sometimes it may be 100%. For me, responsibility is an important character trait. Then what I do is we identify the situation that elicits that character trait. So as you start writing your questions, you could say, how do you prepare for a day's work? Well, that's called getting things done trait, the discipline trait. And the German word Gestalt, that means they have to get things done. And then often we ask questions, tell me about a time. Go back to that tip-off piece too. You don't want to give too much information, because people who have high ability in that character will give you examples all day long. People who don't have that will kind of walk around the bush and not give you the right answer. And then leave the question hanging. I often end my questions with, please describe, please illustrate. And people will say, well, what do you mean by that? They may be saying, I don't really know what you're talking about, and I need some little time here to figure out how to make something up, is what I found. So the cleaner and the more concise question you have is more powerful. This means that you do not ask what you did not do. In the next slide, it talks about different types of questions. In my world, when I help people write questions, first is, what is the behavior? But what kind of question can you write that will either give you a predictive response or a non-predictive? We'll kind of tell you what it means. So let me just read that first question to you. And so out there in TV land, maybe pretend like I'm interviewing you. Okay, let's get the feel of this question. What would you do if someone asked you to do something that was not in your job description? We're measuring initiative here. We first decided, is initiative needed for this job? We defined the behavior. We talked to people with high initiative. And when we talked to the folks who had high initiative, the predictive response, this is what our top performers would say. I would do it. There was no hesitation in the answer. They often will offer an example with it. And I have done this since the 1980s. And people who have high initiative do not need to be tipped off or prompted. They will give you an example. Sometimes people will say, well, do you want an example? I said, that is up to you if you'd like to give one. I had one candidate the other day say, well, I'd rather not give one. So they went into non-predictive land. You'll hear people that'll kind of skirt around the question. Well, it depends on what's being asked. I would ask my manager, I'm not sure. And so often when I'm listening in interviews, I'm listening for patterns of behavior. Do they have initiative or do they not? Now that sounds very binary and very cold, but during this interview, I'm seeking to see if they have that behavior. That's one example. We have tons of examples. Another question is, if a manager comes in and tells you, you must complete a project you're working on and you have an engagement at 10 after work, what would you do? High talent who are responsible. Now this may not, some of you are probably responsible there and you've gotten in trouble because you have postponed family events. But in this question, what we're looking for, do they have the ability to be responsible? They would postpone. So all the research around this question, these questions are reliable and valid, and there are 3 questions you can take away and use right away. And you will be interested to hear how candidates talk. They said they would postpone or cancel my engagement and finish the work. Non-predictive is, I would try to finish it. If not, let my manager know that I would finish it tomorrow, and I would ask someone to do it. It depends. About 48% of, at least when I've used that question, are pretty responsible. The other remaining, what they would do is leave you high and dry. And then the next question is, how do you deal with disagreements with a coworker? We're measuring teamwork. They listen to the other person to see their side. Communication is key. Try to find, so these are things you would hear, maybe not exactly like this, but as an interviewer, it's our job to really listen. In this interview, I don't tip off or probe them. If I find out they have these behaviors, then I will probably go into maybe bringing them into a face-to-face interview. A lot of mine have been done via the phone or Zoom. And then the non-predictive is to avoid conflict. So as we kind of look through that, what's interesting is, Shali, and I know that you're taking off from here, is the whole goal is to first determine what are the behaviors you need for that job. Sit down and really determine. I have all kinds of tools to do that, but if you can reach out if you have questions. But what are the behaviors you need for that job? And 2, Look at your questions in your database right now. Which questions are predicting behavior? And Shali, take it away. Hopefully I gave you a quick down and dirty of
I'll give it.
two-day
Yeah,
course
I know
down
we're
into
getting close
15
to the
minutes.
end here. So, so really now that you have their responses, the challenge is how do you evaluate them? We have predictive responses that will be similar to top performers. But then you have some non-predictive responses and most importantly, warning signs. So I'll give you a brief example. I interviewed a job candidate for one of my clients 2 weeks ago, and many of the questions I asked were about teamwork, about, completing the work assignments and so forth. And repeatedly in her responses, she would begin with, I'm a very emotional person. How do you deal with conflicts and disagreements within a team? I'm a very emotional person. And after her fourth response to different questions about her being a very emotional person, I started to get worried because that was a warning sign to me. Because one of the things that I thought about is how is this person going to respond when her manager gives her negative feedback or a customer is angry? Is she going to become all emotional? You would be surprised at some of the responses that you will get as you continue to use this. And I'm sure that Ed and Andrew know exactly what I'm talking about. You will get some very bizarre answers that are not predictive. You didn't necessarily identify them as non-predictive, but they are a warning sign. So once you have your responses, you need to score them. And how you score them, you can determine plus or minuses, tally them up. We have a rating scale we use with a range because I know some questions nailed it. I mean, those responses nailed it, while other ones are kind of on the fence, and then some of them are warning signs. So when we compare our candidates, we want to give them a score on this interview so we can see, did this person score 85% and this one scored 60? And so you need to be able to not only identify if it's predictive or non-predictive, but have an overall score in order to see who your top contenders are.
Shali, you got muted.
Charlie, you're muted.
The whole time?
Just
Oh.
within the
Okay,
last.
just then? Okay, all right, sorry. So I wanted to come back and Ed and Andrew, I'd ask you guys to come up with one. For the rest of the audience, I don't think we'll have time to go around and call on people verbally. So I want you to enter your favorite interview questions in the chat box, and we'll accumulate those and you can view them. So Andrew, would you share with us one of your favorite questions you like to ask in an interview that helps you understand the person beyond the resume?
Absolutely. So, I always try to remember that it's not a grilling session. It's a collaborative experience in which I'm trying to learn as much about them as they can find out about our company as well. I really like to know what do they enjoy doing outside of work, and do they have any personal goals or things that they're trying to achieve? So it's a little bit of a combo question there, but I really try to understand, what gets them motivated, what gets them excited, what is it that they find enjoyable. And so it's, again, we are a family of companies, and we are very, very focused on employee well-being. And it's important for me to understand what gets them excited as well.
Great. Ed, how about you?
Yeah, I go with Andrew on the first question there. Definitely. You typically ask what you love to do when you're not working. That's a beautiful question because somebody can tell you so many different things. Like, for example, if you're hiring a marketing person, you can kind of tell how creative, how competitive, that person is, and so forth, or how eloquent, how they're able to do. So those are different, traits and attributes you end up finding finding about people like that. Another one that I really love to ask is their philanthropic initiatives. You know, when they talk about philanthropic initiatives and activities they do outside of work or at work, you know, it tells me a lot about them in terms of their behavior. You know, it tells me a lot about them in terms of teamwork, working with other people, you know, helping other people and that kind of stuff. So it's usually there's several questions that we go, you know, trying to identify first the traits and attributes that drive that passion. But those two questions are, you know, nailed. I mean, those are basically good questions to ask in an interview.
Great, great. Many of you are asking, many of you are putting your favorite interview question in the chat. Continue to do that. We will be able to distribute those with our follow-up email, along with a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar for you. So not to worry. All right, we're coming to the end stretch here. We have just a few more slides. I did want to take a moment to talk about Ethics in Business Alliance. This is a new program that we are a major sponsor with, as well as Recognize Good. And we are encouraging people to join the Ethics in Business Alliance. It is free. You will receive some great resources that will help you in these initiatives to hire for character, building ethics and strong company culture. And Delia is going to show everyone how easy it is to join. You simply go to the recognizegood.org website, click on the Join the Alliance, and then you enter your name and email address, and you will begin to receive membership materials for your organization. And this is just one of the topics that we cover in our materials and content. So I want everyone to be able to take advantage of those free resources. All right, so when we talk about strategies for improving your hiring results, we've talked about behavioral interviewing, and that constitutes our hiring decision about 40%. Okay, that's the bulk of it. But we begin with an interview process that includes reviewing the resumes and interviewing our job candidates first for their skills and competencies, right? Because we don't want to hire an accountant that doesn't have skills and experience conducting accounting tasks, right? Then the behavioral interview process at Premier HR Solutions, we do two things. We visually screen the resume, then we conduct a phone screen to interview for skills and competencies, and then we go into our first round of behavioral interviewing. And we conduct a behavioral interview based on the primary traits that our hiring manager has identified. And sometimes we'll even take them through two behavioral interviews, a longer one first, and then a second one where I may follow up or a second recruiter may follow up. And then it's time for the company to interview. And the hiring manager will sometimes be the final interview, or the hiring manager will also ask for another executive or team member to conduct those interviews. The point is that getting it right takes more than just one interview. It's more than a phone screen, show up, do your in-person interview, and we have enough information to make the right hire. It involves a series and rounds of interview processes. And it also involves gathering information that you can collect from other sources. The more information you have, the better your chances are to improve your hiring results. Some companies will use an assessment. It may be a cognitive assessment. It may be a personality assessment. It should never be used as the sole determining factor in hiring a person, but it is part of the big picture. Conducting a background to check criminal background, educational background, validate the work history that's on the resume. That also protects you from negligent hiring and can identify. And I have conducted backgrounds and found that there have been discrepancies in what someone reported on their resume and the actual contacting the job to validate the work experience through a background check. And then last of all, references. Now, I get a lot of questions about references. Really, Shawley? I mean, the job candidate's going to give you the people that are going to give great references. You would be surprised at what information you can gather from a reference. And Bob and I talked about this when we were preparing for the presentation. And Bob gave, some really great insight. And that is that reference, those questions on that reference form, and we do references for all of our new hires, should include questions about those traits. So for example, one of the questions we ask is about not just does this person do a good job, would you recommend them for a rehire or so forth, but we'll ask, is this person, and this kind of gets back to where Andrew talked about being on offense or defense, is this person proactive? Or are they more reactive? Where do their strengths lie, right? Because some people are very good at being proactive, and then other people are stronger as when crisis hits, they're reactive, they follow through on that. But you really want to know, does this person, which one of these categories do they fall into? Is this person that likes to work independently or likes to work more in a team or receive instructions from a manager? So ask those reference questions and you would be surprised at what information people will share or what they won't share. And again, it just gives you a little more added information. The process for hiring is very complicated and it's very comprehensive. You cannot rush through this. You cannot skip steps. If you do and you rush through it and you skip steps, most likely you are going to experience a bad hire. So I hope that today we have given you some great information and some takeaways on how to improve your hiring results and hiring for character and those traits. We have our contact information. Feel free to contact Bob and I directly. I have the Recognize Good website, Premier HR Solutions. Bob and I both work with clients helping in hiring and training managers and helping design your processes for you. Feel free to email me any questions that you might have. I'll open it up now. If there's any questions, Delia, do we have any final questions? I see some really good comments that we have.
Just a lot of comments about what to look for, behaviors, questions, different things that people were posting throughout the presentation based on the questions that we put up there throughout the presentation.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I was hoping that we would have more of an opportunity to let people verbally talk about their ideas, but we had a lot of information to cover and we had a lot of panelists that contributed some great things. So we'll send you everything that we have here today to share with you. And I hope that thank you again for your time today. And I hope this has been very informative. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Andrew, Bob, Delia, Joel. Appreciate it. And thanks, everybody. If anybody wants to stay on for any individual questions, Q&A, I'm here for you. So I'll stay on for a few more minutes.
Great teamwork, everybody.
Great questions. So do you want to unmute any of them, Delia, or how?
Yeah, if somebody wants to raise their hand, if they do have a question they want to. Okay, so Victoria, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to go ahead and speak. You'll just have to unmute yourself.
I think, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, maybe my picture will show up eventually. Bob, and to everyone, I'm going to be interviewing for a position of a fundraising director for a nonprofit. That position is unique within the organization. No one else is going to be a fundraiser there. So it's a very unique role. They don't know what qualities and traits and attributes they need in that person. How might I go about evaluating for that organization the attributes and qualities, traits for a role that's completely unique? I think I know the answer, but I'd rather hear it from you guys.
So, do you
Go ahead, Bob.
So interesting. So, a lot of it is there's different tools you can use, but one is to really look at the 4 areas of people, processes, ideas, and actions. And so I actually probably could send you something to kind of get you started on that. But some traits that really come up in the area of nonprofit, and I've worked with a lot of different nonprofit organizations, is first, are those behaviors posted? Once you get those behaviors, they really should be posted in your job description. So your job description and your interview mirrors and matches. And legally, that's a good thing to do. But some things that come up, right, if they're in that leadership position, they have to have a couple of things. They have to have empathy. They have to have courage, which those two together sometimes can conflict because they kind of seem like opposite traits. But I'd be happy to sit down and kind of brainstorm with you a couple to get your brain started on that. Because I think if it's a position that you aren't typically hiring and you can't interview anybody and find out what are some of the traits. I don't know if you're on LinkedIn, but sometimes it's good to poll and saying, hey, I'm filling this job position. What are some really critical traits in a nonprofit director? So I think, getting that resource out there is very helpful. But I have I can chat with you offline too and share a tool that I've used to kind of maybe narrow down that scope, because that is very daunting to figure out. One of them is like equity. I was looking at that trait. That's an unusual trait, and it's really defining it. So that was kind of a lengthy talk. Does that make sense?
Ed, did you have something you wanted to share, Ed?
Yeah, no, if you're looking at just traits and attributes that person would have to have, I would say there's about 5 different things, and Bob mentioned a couple of them. But I think being an influencer would be a good one. Charisma. I think that, if you realize that person has a lot of charisma, leadership, sales background, but also a big important one, somebody that actually reflects being trustworthy. I think that's a lot of things in a fundraiser. As I done that so much, I had to learn all those things. And those are, I think, the top 5 traits and attributes that I would look in a person.
That's a great point, Ed.
Yeah, and when you hopefully you do have, Victoria, you do have a job description. So when you're looking at the job description, prioritize the top, 5 things that they'll be doing, and what kind of trait do they need to be successful. So if they're going to be raising funds for fundraising, then that is very similar to sales, right? And what are those skills? What are those traits that you need to be successful in sales? Influencer, right? And Andrew, you're one of our top sales people. Influencer, communicator, right? What are those traits in order to influence people to contribute to your organization?